So here's something that happened on November 27th, 2024, that should tell you everything about where we're headed. The internet in Abkhazia, a breakaway region on the Black Sea coast, went completely dark. Not slow, not disrupted, completely offline. The reason was almost darkly comical. Cryptocurrency miners were consuming so much electricity that the entire power grid collapsed, taking all internet infrastructure with it. Within 48 hours, the government announced a total ban on crypto mining and started raiding mining operations with armed police. But here's what nobody's talking about. This wasn't just a technical failure or an energy crisis. This was a preview of what governments can do when digital infrastructure becomes inconvenient or threatening. They can just turn it off. And it's happening everywhere right now, with increasing frequency and decreasing justification. For 3 decades, we operated under an assumption about the internet. The assumption was that it was ungovernable, too decentralized, too distributed. No single authority could control it. If one path was blocked, traffic would route around it. The internet treats censorship as damage and routes around it. That was the promise. That was the design philosophy. And for a while, it seemed true. That assumption is dying. Not slowly, not in some distant authoritarian future. Right now. Governments around the world have discovered something important. They don't need to control the internet. They just need to control the physical infrastructure it runs on. Power grids, data centers, undersea cables, satellite ground stations, and the buildings where internet service providers connect to each other. Control those physical points, and the internet becomes just another system you can switch off when it becomes inconvenient. Let me give you the numbers from just this year, 2024. Pakistan shut down mobile internet nationwide during political protests. Not once, multiple times. India implemented internet blackouts in Manipur state that have now lasted over 18 months. 18 months. That's the longest internet shutdown ever imposed by a democracy. Iran throttled internet speeds to roughly 10% of normal during women's rights protests. Russia passed laws requiring all internet traffic to route through government-controlled nodes and has successfully tested disconnecting from the global internet entirely. China demonstrated during COVID lockdowns that it could digitally isolate entire provinces, tens of millions of people, and the world barely noticed. And it's not just authoritarian regimes. France proposed emergency powers to block social media during riots. The United Kingdom passed the Online Safety Act, giving government broad authority to compel tech companies to restrict content. These are democracies. These are countries with strong rule of law traditions. And they're building the same capabilities. Because here's the thing about the internet that most people don't understand. It's not a cloud. It's not distributed magic floating in the air. It's incredibly physical, and that physical infrastructure is vulnerable at multiple critical points. Start with undersea cables. 99% of intercontinental internet traffic flows through approximately 500 undersea fiber optic cables. These are physical cables lying on the ocean floor. Cut one cable and you can isolate entire regions or countries. In 2024, multiple cables in the Red Sea were damaged. The official explanation was ship anchors. But the damage was suspiciously concentrated in geopolitically sensitive areas at a time of heightened tension. Egypt's internet connectivity dropped 25% overnight. Yemen went almost completely dark. Nobody fixed it quickly because nobody wanted to send repair ships into an active conflict zone. Then there are Internet Exchange Points, IXPS. These are the physical buildings where internet service providers connect their networks. Nearly all internet traffic in a country flows through 5 to 10 of these locations. They're not distributed. They're concentrated. control those buildings, and you control the internet. In Russia, government agents are now stationed at every major IXP with hardware installed that can filter, throttle, or completely block traffic. The Russian government can now flip a switch, and every ISP in the country goes through government-controlled nodes. They've tested this system. It works. There's the Domain Name System, DNS. This is how your browser turns a website name into an IP address. It's supposed to be decentralized, but in practice, there are 13 root server clusters that the entire system depends on. They're distributed globally, but they're still choke points, and countries are building national alternatives. China has its own DNS root system. Russia is testing complete isolation. Iran is preparing what it calls a national internet that would route zero traffic outside government control. And then there's the simplest method of all, power. No electricity, no internet. It's that simple. It's that brutal. It's that effective. And governments control power generation and distribution. When Abkhazia's grid collapsed, the internet died with it. That wasn't an accident. That was a demonstration of the fundamental vulnerability. What we're watching in real time is the transformation of temporary emergency measures into permanent infrastructure. Turkey built an internet censorship system initially to block specific websites. Now that system can throttle nationwide internet speeds instantly with a single command. Myanmar's military demonstrated total internet shutdown capability during the 2021 coup. They cut the entire country off from the global internet for days, and they've maintained that capability since. It's still there, ready to use whenever politically convenient. Ethiopia cut internet access to the Tigray region for nearly 2 years during its civil conflict. Complete digital siege. No communication in or out. The international community expressed concern. Nobody did anything. Bangladesh routinely shuts down mobile internet during political unrest. It's now considered normal operating procedure. Venezuela blocks specific social media platforms during political crises using deep packet inspection technology. The platforms aren't banned. They're just technically unreachable. And here's what should terrify you. Authoritarian regimes aren't hiding these capabilities. They're advertising them. Russia's sovereign internet law, passed in 2019, requires internet service providers to install government hardware that can disconnect Russia from the global internet entirely if the government decides it's necessary. They ran tests in 2021 and 2022. The tests worked. Russia demonstrated that it can operate as a national intranet, completely independent of the outside world. All the technical infrastructure is in place. All they need is a political decision to activate it. But the really disturbing trend is that democracies are building identical capabilities. The justifications are different. Child safety, national security, preventing misinformation, stopping the spread of violent content. But the technical infrastructure is the same. Once you have the capability to filter and control internet traffic for child safety, you have the capability to filter and control internet traffic for anything. The UK's Online Safety Act requires platforms to scan for illegal content. That sounds reasonable until you realize it requires breaking encryption. You cannot scan encrypted messages without building backdoors in the encryption, and once those backdoors exist, they will be used for purposes far beyond their original justification. The EU's Digital Services Act gives governments power to compel content removal within hours. The mechanism for rapid content removal is the mechanism for censorship. There's no technical difference. Internet shutdowns are now standard tools of state control. In 2023, there were 196 documented internet shutdowns across 39 countries. 2024 is on track to exceed 250 shutdowns. The economic cost averages about $1.9 billion per shutdown. But governments are willing to pay that cost because digital control is worth more than economic activity during a crisis. And full shutdowns are actually the less sophisticated approach. Throttling is the new weapon. Iran perfected this technique during protests. The internet stays on. Technically, there's connectivity, but speeds are reduced to 10 or 15% of normal. People can't coordinate. They can't upload videos. They can't share information in real time. But because the internet is technically still functioning, it doesn't trigger the same international condemnation as a complete shutdown. By the time anyone manages to upload video of police violence, the protest is over and the political moment has passed. Then there's infrastructure warfare between nations. Undersea cables are being mysteriously damaged in geopolitically sensitive areas. Russia has specialized submarines specifically designed to locate and cut undersea cables. NATO navies track these submarines. China is systematically mapping the global undersea cable network. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are documented military capabilities that multiple nations are developing and deploying. During the war in Ukraine, satellite ground stations became military targets. GPS jamming near conflict zones is now routine, and GPS jamming disrupts internet infrastructure because network timing depends on GPS signals. DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, now reach terabit scale. That's enough bandwidth to knock entire countries offline if targeted at critical infrastructure points. The internet was supposed to root around censorship. That was the founding promise. The network would treat censorship as damage and automatically find alternative paths. But that only works if the infrastructure itself isn't compromised. When governments control the physical layer, when they control power, cables, exchange points, and DNS infrastructure, there is no routing around it. There are no alternative paths. The network cannot repair itself if the foundation is controlled. We are watching the internet fragment into national digital territories. The Chinese internet already operates semi-independently behind the Great Firewall and Golden Shield systems. Foreign websites are inaccessible or severely throttled. Domestic alternatives dominate. The Russian internet is preparing for full isolation. They've tested it. They know it works. Iran is building a completely closed national network designed to function without any external connections whatsoever. India has implemented data localization laws that require internet traffic involving Indian users to stay within Indian borders and be stored on Indian servers. The European Union is creating regulatory barriers that function as soft digital borders. Different privacy rules, different content rules, different enforcement mechanisms. The result is the same. The internet starts to have borders. The dream of a borderless global internet, the dream that inspired a generation of technologists and activists, is dying. In its place, we're getting national digital territories with walls and checkpoints and kill switches. And when the crisis comes, real or manufactured, every government now knows it can simply turn off the internet for the population. It's not even particularly difficult. Cut power to data centers, block traffic at internet exchange points, disconnect undersea cables, issue orders to telecommunications companies. Modern internet infrastructure is centralized enough that a determined government can shut it down or severely degrade it within hours. And the more countries do it, the more normalized it becomes. The more normalized it becomes, the lower the threshold for doing it again. Pakistan shuts down the internet during protests. Other countries watch. Nothing happens. No significant international consequences. So Bangladesh does it during their unrest. Then Ethiopia. Then India. Each shutdown lowers the barrier for the next one. What was once unthinkable becomes routine. What was once a tool of authoritarian regimes becomes a tool of democratic governments facing unrest. And technology companies have very little leverage in this fight. Google and Facebook can make all the statements they want about supporting internet freedom. But when a government orders telecommunications companies to cut service, tech companies have no ability to override that. The infrastructure isn't theirs. The power isn't theirs. The physical control belongs to the state. The internet kill switch isn't a future threat. It's already installed. It's been tested. It's ready. In dozens of countries, the technical capability exists right now to shut down or severely restrict internet access with a single order. The only question is not whether the capability exists. The capability clearly exists. The question is when it gets used and what justification is offered. Because once you accept that governments can turn off the internet during emergencies, you've accepted the principle. And then everything becomes an emergency. Political protests are an emergency. Civil unrest is an emergency. Misinformation is an emergency. Threats to public order are an emergency. The definition of emergency expands to cover whatever the government finds inconvenient. The internet in Abkhazia went dark because of cryptocurrency miners overloading the power grid. That's the official story. But the government's response wasn't to build more power infrastructure. It was to ban the activity and shut it down with force. Because the lesson governments learned isn't that infrastructure needs to be more robust. The lesson they learned is that when digital activity becomes inconvenient, you can just turn it off. And if you can turn it off for crypto miners, you can turn it off for protesters, for journalists, for anyone engaging in activity the state doesn't approve of. The kill switch is installed, and it's being normalized. Country by country, shutdown by shutdown, the internet is becoming just another system that governments can control, restrict, or eliminate when it suits their interests. The promise of an ungovernable global communications network is being quietly buried under government control of physical infrastructure. This is how digital freedom ends, not with censorship software that can be circumvented, not with content moderation that can be appealed, but with the power grid turning off, with the cables being cut, with the exchange points being blocked, physical control of physical infrastructure. And when the internet is off, there's no routing around it. There's just silence.